Thank you, everyone, for joining our program today. This is the first of a new series that we're doing is entitled Supply Chain Information Flow. I'd like to turn it over to our host, David Johnson.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for tuning in to Supply Chain Information Flow. We're happy to have you here. We just want you to know that we have been trying to reach you about your car's warranty, and we'd like to spend some time talking to you about it today. No, I'm totally just joking. We are here today to start the first in a series of conversations with our peers in procurement and some people outside of procurement to get an understanding of how we as procurement folk can, for lack of a better term, be in the room where it happens. All my Hamilton fans might understand that. This is the first of a series. We'll be talking today with Sam Gupta about software licensing. Sam is an ERP thought leader in the digital transformation space with a focus on financial systems and ERP. He's the CEO, principal consultant at ElevatIQ, an independent ERP and digital consulting firm. He's also incredibly knowledgeable about software licensing and business process reengineering. And I'm excited to talk with him. And we'll get right into it after I give this really quick soliloquy on the role of procurement and technology. We sit in a function that is generally on the outskirts of the technology area. Some of us sit with IT, but most of us don't. We are consistently thought of as a piece of the process, as sometimes a roadblock to getting things done by our tech peers. Well, how do we get to be that trusted advisor? How do we get to be a part of the tech team? Supply chain information flow, this series of discussions, hopefully it will help you put you in the room, right? It'll get you from being the paper pusher and get you into the room where the strategic decisions are being made. And with that, you know, we realize that every company is a data company. Every company is looking to utilize their data, to monetize their data. Every company creates data. Every company needs data to be agile and to be informed and to make better decisions. And today, Sam and I will talk to you about how you facilitate those things via software licensing. So, Sam, let's start with the easy part. Let's start with well, first, why don't you give a better introduction? Because I'm sure I didn't do you justice. Why don't you give us a better introduction of you and ElevateIQ?
Yeah, happy to do that. By the way, thank you so much for starting this series. I love the work that you and Kathy and ISM as the organization is doing. It is super beneficial for us as the community. Now, let's go back to the easy question. I was thinking that maybe I am going to get a question related to the car warranty that you mentioned. I'm not too sure about the software licensing, to be honest. So we are going to have a lot of fun. All right, so about my intro and the ElevateIQ. I am Sam Gupta, principal at ElevateIQ. And we focus primarily on the ERP selection, digital transformation. So obviously the contract negotiation and the contract review is going to be part of our offering. I have been doing ERP and digital transformation for roughly 20 years. I have interacted with every single vendor, ERP or the digital transformation vendor in some shape or form. As part of ElevateIQ, we do the business process re-engineering that you already mentioned. It's going to be the multi-system architecture. And I think that's where the sweet spot is when we look at the software licensing, how these systems are going to talk to each other. You also mentioned the data. If your systems cannot talk to each other, if you don't have the binding thread in the data, it's going to be really hard to find the insight that you are looking for. And then most companies feel that the insight does not work. So yeah, so as part of that, we look at the multi-system architecture, and we also get called when companies are really not trying to have the control for the ERP, because most of the ERP systems are going to be off the rails. They are going to be over the budget, irrespective of whatever you do. So then we are the 911 for a lot of companies. We try to save them as much as possible. I don't know if that's enough for the intro, but I just wanted to set that stage.
I think that's a pretty good intro. So you're the 911 Save My ERP organization. It's good to know. Everybody write that down. Sam Gupta will save your ERP and your budget potentially. Let's start with an easy question, a fundamental question, right? What's the difference between on-prem and cloud licensing? And what are some of the hidden costs in each of those models?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And just, overarching view, when we look at from the licensing perspective, in case of on-prem, you are going to have million more variables that you need to worry about than in the cloud. In the cloud, you are transferring this responsibility to a vendor, and you have far more predictable cost model. In case of on-prem, you are worrying about the infrastructure. Now, when you get into the infrastructure discussion, you are going to get in the nuts and bolts of IT. You are going to be worrying about, okay, how many servers do I need? What kind of data centers do I need? What is going to be my capacity? How many transactions am I processing? What is going to be my security model? Who is going to be taking care of the data center? So literally, you are trying to create a manufacturing organization, to be honest. Okay, and it's going to have a lot of different variables. So again, unless you are a very large organization, this is not the time and age where you should be worrying about the core IT. Now, if you are a Fortune 500 organization, 100 organization, then it's a different case. If you already have your IT organization set up, then the cloud is probably going to be, you need to do the cost analysis of the cloud versus on-prem, to be honest, if you are that big, because you may have a very big organization. But let's say if you are SMB, you are probably better off just sticking to cloud, just because you don't have as many variables to worry about. Now, hidden cost in case of cloud as well, okay? So cloud is not as easy as, okay, everybody's going for cloud, let me go to cloud. Now, when we look at cloud is priced. I mean, obviously the people who are pricing, they're super sharp, smart people. They are looking at how people are buying, and they are creating their strategies based on how people are going to be paying. So what cloud has done, obviously they are trying to distribute the cost over the period of time rather than paying it upfront. You are paying it over the period of time across number of years. That's the only part, and you are transferring the responsibility of infrastructure to your cloud provider. But that is not to say that you don't have hidden costs in case of cloud. In case of cloud as well, for example, tiers, okay? When we look at these tiers, every cloud vendor is going to have some sort of tiers. And it's similar to your Spirit airline model, the way Spirit airline model works. Now, if you think, okay, which airline do you fly typically on? Okay, do you fly on American, or do you fly on Southwest, or Spirit? They all have their business model. They all are trying to make profit, and they have certain ways of which customer segment they are trying to attract. If you have very deep understanding of the pricing model, sometimes the Spirit airline model could be far more cost effective. Sometimes American could be far more cost effective. But you are going to have far many variables in case of your Spirit airline, and you need to understand how your cost is going to increase. Meaning, if you are trying to carry 2 baggages, okay, you need to pay far more. If you are trying to eat really good lunch on your Spirit airline, then you need to pay far more. So it could be really tricky to be understand when you are looking at million, 10 million, $100 million dollar engagement to understand all of these variables where your cost is going to increase. And as we all know, software is a beast. Okay, it's very invisible. Nobody knows what happens inside that ERP system. And it's very, very, very hard to predict the cost unless you have very deep system architecture, IT background, obviously. So IT, contract, legal, what else am I missing here? Obviously, you need to understand business. So you need to understand these things deeply to be able to predict the cost of your ERP system. So I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some of the hidden variables that you are looking at.
Yeah, that was definitely deep down the rabbit hole. So let's go back up 2 rungs of the ladder. We started talking about cloud, right?
Yeah.
What are some of the different licensing models, the license types in the world of cloud, right? Because that's the 2 things. The first decision is, are you going to be on premises? Are you going to be on cloud? The second decision you're going to make is, how do you license this particular piece of software? So what are the different license models in the world of cloud?
So there are a couple of them, I would say, and it also depends upon the system type you are procuring. Okay, if you are procuring a system that is going to be slightly more business transaction focused, for the most part, you are going to get the named user license. The way named user license works is, it is going to be per user, meaning for each employee that is touching the ERP system, if you need them to be individually identifiable inside the system, you need a license for that. That's what named license means. Now, if you actually look at things like WMS system or the TMS system, they might be pricing it differently. They might still be pricing based on per device. For them, device is the individually identifiable, because sometimes you might have 500 people in the warehouse. Now, you don't want to pay per user, because each user you are probably paying $15 an hour, but ERP is going to cost $25 an hour. So that's probably not a very smart decision. So that's why they price based on the device, because sometimes people will be shifting over multiple shifts. So you have the named user license, you have the device-based license, but the trickiest one that you are going to see and face in case of cloud is going to be the consumption-based. And typically that is always the trickiest to master, because the pricing is very complex. In some situations, it could be very friendly, but in general, it's designed to be very complex. So the way consumption-based pricing works is, it is going to be either based on per transaction. For example, if you look at any of the P2P systems, Aribas, Coupas of the world, all procurement people know about it, right? So you are going to be paying the percentage of your transaction. If you look at any of the POS systems or the credit card systems, they are going to be charging per transaction. The same philosophy applies in case of some ERP systems actually do the consumption-based pricing. They are going to be pricing per document. And the way document is defined is, it's going to be, okay, how many sales orders are you cutting in a year or month? How many purchase order you are cutting in a month? So that's going to be the consumption-based. So basically 3 licensing model. Number 1 is going to be your named user. Number 2 is going to be per device. And number 3 is going to be your consumption-based. Now, there are a lot of layers to each of them. There are many different licensing models inside them, but these are 3 general types.
Okay. So we know that ElevateIQ is they're champions at negotiating software contracts. Obviously, a part of that is understanding pricing tiers and negotiating for pricing tiers. What are, like, how do vendors design their tiers, and what are some of the things that you look for in contracts when you're reviewing the tiers?
So yeah, so one of the things that we typically like to pay attention to, how many different legal variables are there. And when I say legal variables, meaning, okay, how many moving parts are going to be in the contract? So sometimes when you look at the contract, you are going to feel that, what, I'm working with SAP, I'm working with Salesforce, I'm working with Oracle, I should be good. But underneath in the contract, they are going to have the white labeled arrangements with a lot of different vendors, and they are trying to sell somebody else's product. They may have control on the pricing, they may not have control on the pricing. Okay, so unless you understand how to read the fine lines of the contract, you would not know what to look for in the contract and what are different variables that you can expect. The other thing is going to be how the systems are going to be talking to each other. Typically, you are going to have a lot of problems with that. From the strategy perspective, the question you asked, okay, what are these guys thinking in their boardroom? When you look at SAP Salesforce, for them, obviously their end goal is going to be, okay, how can I push more SAP products in the architecture? They want to control your architecture. That's what they want to do. They are trying to create the barriers from the system perspective that you will not be able to go to the other vendor. Their pricing is going to be far friendlier if you are going to be utilizing everything from them. If you are going to be utilizing a third-party system, then they are going to make sure that, and third parties, especially if it is going to be their competitor. For example, let's say if you talk about SAP-based architecture, now if you are going to include Salesforce, they'll make sure that it's slightly more expensive. If you are going for Salesforce, if you are going to be including Microsoft in the architecture, they'll make sure that Microsoft does not get into the deal. So these guys are always thinking about this. Now, you are not going to know this unless you have very deep understanding of the market, how the market forces move, and how they structure their contract and the pricing. The variables are always going to be the connection points, the integration, how these systems are going to be talking to each other, how many add-ons are being utilized, who is owning the code is always going to be the bottom line that nobody knows. Nobody asks that question. Who is the owner of code? SAP does not own every single line of code that they are trying to sell. Nobody does. Nobody does. None of the vendors. So somebody else typically owns a piece of code that they are very, very, very crafty in the way they design their contract. So one of the things that we do as part of ElevateIQ is, one of the questions that I'm going to be asking, okay, I'm going to be identifying every single moving parts in that bill of material that you are trying to utilize. And I am looking for the code ownership. Who's the owner? What is the relationship? How deep is the relationship? And how aligned these companies are. Because if there are going to be any conflicts in those agreements, then that is actually going to have the pricing impact later on, depending upon how well they play with each other.
When we talk about things like ERP systems, and you mentioned suppliers like SAP, you talk about CRM systems, you talk about Salesforce, these are long-term relationships, because once you put them in, it's hard to get out of them, right? Yep. Sharon asked, what are some triggers for cost reduction of software licenses if we're thinking about these long-term large supplier relationships?
So when I say, if you are simply looking for the discounts, one of the advice that I have for every single customer that I talk to, that do not focus on the short-term discounts. Okay, you are going to be burned far more in the long term if you are super focused on the short-term license, because they are designed to grab you. And as you correctly pointed out, when you say that you have a strategic relationship with every single vendor that is owning your system, business system code, and when you have that strategic relationship, they have far more clout in the game. You don't have clout because they are running your business transactions. If they stop, then you will not be able to cut your sales orders. You will not be able to cut your invoices. So when you look at the cost reduction, typically your approach should be that, how can I create the vendor independent architecture? How can I create vendor agnostic architecture? There are ways to do it. Okay, so one of the things that you want to do is you want to bring a vendor agnostic integration tool in the architecture. If you have that, then none of the vendors are going to have cloud. You can kick out SAP at any point of time. You can kick out Oracle at any point of time. So now when you look at the cost reduction, if you're looking at the overarching cost of the initiative, and the major variables are not really going to be your licensing costs. In my experience, the major variables are always going to be, okay, how much are you spending in data migration? What is your path for data migration? For example, let's say if you go to your Salesforce, you can probably get the subscription for, I don't know, $50 a month per user. You can probably start on that, any small company. But one thing people don't realize is Salesforce is very smart in the way they are pricing their product. The basic product that they have is not the same product as the enterprise product. So now when you have to move from your basic product to your enterprise product, you need a consultant, and typically that consultant is going to be charging a lot of money. So even if you got, let's say if you were paying $50 and they gave you a discount of $5, maybe you saved, $5,000, $10,000 in the licensing, but your cost, overarching cost, if you're looking of the total cost of ownership in the long term, it's going to be far higher because you didn't understand the architecture, you didn't understand the product, you didn't understand the long-term roadmap as you are going to transition from one system to the next. I don't know if I answered your question or not.
I think we did partially. Sharon asked about cost reduction for software licenses. I think you hit that. Understanding the long-term roadmap for the product, yeah, I think that works. And thinking strategically and not acting tactically. Kenneth Olson asked about tips for getting around paying for shelfware during the implementation of SaaS licenses that are paid for upfront. You gave the perfect example there in Salesforce. You start paying for Salesforce, you're paying for Salesforce forever.
Exactly. And I'm not sure if I follow the question. Do you have the understanding of the shelfware, what he meant by shelfware?
So shelfware is nomenclature for software that you paid for and you can't use right away.
Okay,
you build out a long-term Salesforce engagement and they give you advertising studio that you don't have plans to use, but they threw it in because it's, they're putting it as part of the bundle. Is there a way for you to get the benefit of that bundle without having to pay for everything up front?
So let me see if I can answer this question. So we have seen in some cases what vendors are willing to do is they are willing to waive off the licensing cost when you are not going to be using that product. Okay. Some vendors have also started monitoring the adoption, especially in the cloud world, and they are really particular about it. Some vendors, I'm not saying everybody does that, but if your licenses are not being used, the customer success team is going to come back to you and they are going to ask you, okay, why are you not using this license? Is it not usable? Are you not able to adopt? What are your challenges? And let me either refund you. Again, not every vendor does that, but there are some vendors that do that. Now, my question to the procurement community is going to be, if you are buying the shelfware, you are buying for a purpose. If you are buying to, let's say, test the scenarios and really test the implementation, you probably need that. But if you bought a software that nobody really uses, I really don't know if you can do more from the negotiation perspective. I think that's a problem with the decision making itself, because you didn't do the change management process, the alignment process that is required. When you buy any software, you need to make sure that you are talking to the users, how they are going to be using the software. And typically that is the part that we see in the community that everybody misses. They simply want to go ahead and buy Salesforce, HubSpot, it doesn't matter which software it is. They simply want to buy without asking, okay, if somebody is asking for a software, why are they asking? Did you draw the requirement model? Did you draw the user journeys? Did you draw the customer journeys, to make them understand how their life is going to be impacted? And there, a little bit of change management process is going to be in play as well. If they don't understand how their life is going to be impacted, they might be very excited that, what, I'm looking for Salesforce. But, they didn't realize how hard it could be to implement, to use, and they ended up not using it. So again, I think that's going to be a very long-winded answer. I don't know if you are simply going to have a clear-cut answer where you can simply create these strategies around the licenses. Typically, in my experience, the license cost is going to be a very small component of the overall cost that you have during your software implementation.
I think that is a pretty good, that's a great answer, honestly, Sam. And I think one of the things that we as procurement people need to think about is, obviously, if we're not in the room where it happens, that we're asking the right questions. We should know the rollout schedules. We should know that this particular piece of software is not going to be available until year 3 of said contract. It's not going to be usable. That only happens by becoming that trusted advisor to IT. I know in my past, I've negotiated opportunities for us to swap out licenses, particularly with Salesforce, right? I buy tons and tons of Service Cloud licenses, and they say, hey, you have this project that you want to do about Advertising Studio or Marketing Cloud or all this stuff. But I know that my marketing people are not the sharpest people in the world, and they're not going to be ready in these next 3 years to transform marketing or SMS text messages and all of this stuff. So I say to Salesforce, I say, all right, I'll give you the commitment, but I'm not going to pay for the licenses up front.
Yeah.
Right? I want the ability to swap out my Service Cloud licenses for Marketing Cloud licenses later on down the line, or Advertising Studio or whatever. And then we'll go back and forth and they'll say, you can swap this for this, but you can't swap this for that. And I think that's a great way for us to grab the economies of scale by building out a big deal, but still getting what we need as an organization.
Yeah, completely agree. And by the way, MEC, even if you do not put those measures in the beginning, you can always negotiate with these vendors. You know, they are always willing to negotiate. If it is going to be simply swapping of different licenses, they are definitely willing to do that.
James DeVito asked an interesting question. When an OEM provides third-party OS software as part of their product, is it customary that the supplier not mark up the recurring OS licensing fee?
Well, yeah, I'm not too sure about that. I think you should be more worried about that relationship, to be honest, because let's say if they pull the plug and if the third-party system is not going to work for your architecture, or if they lose that relationship, I would be worried about that than, you know, worrying about the markup itself. The markup, I mean, typically the way the contracts are structured, they are probably going to have that. Might be some ways around that, meaning, let's say, if you are talking about, you know, incorporating iPaaS as part of your ERP, you could go to Boomi directly, but the pricing that you are going to get as the end customer is probably going to be similar in my experience, because the distributor pricing that they have for their resellers, that's going to be, let's say, 40% off. And when they are selling it to you, it might be 10% off. But overall, you as a customer are probably going to get the similar pricing. There might be a little bit of ways around that, but for the most part, you know, I don't know if you can do a lot there overall from the negotiation perspective.
What are your thoughts and insights around suppliers shifting from perpetual to subscription models and no longer providing support for perpetual licenses? I like the smile, Sam.
Well, so you definitely need to figure out, okay, what you want to do from the architecture perspective and overall your roadmap. We all know that, you know, every company out there from the software perspective is funded by Wall Street for the most part, right? And they all care for the cloud revenue. So cloud is where everybody is trying to go. Every company is trying to go. The reason why they cannot support the perpetual model is because nobody wants perpetual model anymore. So, you know, you need to decide whether you want to be on the cloud or you want to be really on the perpetual model, and you need to plan that strategy ahead, because let's say if you are running very large workload such as SAP, it might take 10 years for you to move to the cloud. So if you are not doing that right now, you are probably already in trouble, because, you know, one of these days they are definitely going to pull the support. So what is going to be your plan to do that? If you want to be on perpetual model, you better figure out, okay, which is the vendor that is really committed for on-prem. You know, as far as I know, not many vendors out there are really committing for the perpetual model. There might be some vendors who might still be doing that. They might be slightly more silent overall in their commitment because they don't want to lose the deal. But overall, their you know, goal is going to be to move everybody to the cloud from the perpetual model. But align yourself with the vendors that might believe that they can pull this off in the long term. But I really don't think so that's going to happen in the industry.
If you think about it from a vendor perspective, you have a perpetual license that's on a version that is 2 or 3 years behind that I now still have to support.
Yeah.
If you are on my subscription model, it's the latest version. Everybody's on the same one. I only have to have one guy who can fix it, one guy who can develop it. I don't have to worry about your old funky version of my software anymore because I don't have to fix it. Terry asked a follow-up question and she said, what about subscription on-prem?
Subscription on-prem is a great you know, model. There are some companies that are willing to do that. Those are going to be, even some of the cloud native vendors, they give you the flexibility that you can be either on the private cloud, or you can be on public cloud, or you can deploy it on-prem, and that's completely okay. But one thing to note when you are doing that is you are responsible for maintenance. Okay, the maintenance could have substantial cost element there that you may not realize. In case of cloud, you are not going to have as much control on the infrastructure because they are controlling for you. So there are pros and cons of both the approaches. In some cases, let's say if your warehouse is in a place where you don't have a lot of internet, then you don't have a choice. You have to go for on-prem. You have to have your own data center, and then the on-prem model could be a great choice there. But yeah, some vendors are still willing to do that, and I think that will still continue. I don't think the market is going to go completely public cloud. The private cloud is always going to be there. It's going to be slightly more expensive. The on-prem model is going to be there as long as you are paying the subscription, as long as you understand that it is going to be your responsibility to maintain, upgrade, to take care of your own data center. Obviously, the vendor is not going to be responsible. The only thing they are going to be responsible for is going to be the code itself. They are not responsible for anything else.
Very cool. Very good answer. How far in the future will a developer know if they are or will be moving licensing to the cloud versus no longer supporting maintenance/support for perpetual licenses?
So that's $1 trillion question that I don't think anybody has answer for. If companies actually had the answer for that, everybody would either would have moved to the cloud, or they would not have mixed strategy. Obviously, they want to give the time to the customers that take your time to move to the cloud. But at the same time, right now, if you look at from the investor's perspective, I don't know an investor who is going to be pro about on-prem. Okay, I just don't know. Okay, who's going to invest money in a company that is really really super pro for your on-prem licensing? So most companies are going to move to cloud in some shape or form. You might have the subscription-based licensing in case of your on-prem. That model is going to exist. Okay, so if you really like the on-prem model, if you really want to maintain your own data center, get the cloud native model from the code perspective and try to maintain that. If you are in the older version, legacy version, as Dave pointed out, there's no way they can afford to support 5,000 versions. Nobody has money for that, and if there are only 2 customers in the market who's on that version, so obviously they need to pull the plug, and they'll say, you know what, I am not going to help you.
I think one of the things that as procurement people, we are uniquely situated to do, we control the person. So we can ask our suppliers to develop roadmaps and share them with us. They have roadmaps. They know in 18 months there's going to be a new version. They know that Salesforce knows every 3 months they're making improvements. We should be able to sit down with our suppliers and say, okay, what are the changes that are coming? When are they coming? And tell me what's happening at least 18 months in advance. That's part of I feel like that's part of our job as procurement people, especially in the technology world. So there's a follow-up. Developers have to know their outlooks. So how long would it take for a developer to make that switch to no longer continuing support, moving solely to the cloud? They have to have plans. So the question pertains to how long that would take. 3 years, 5 years. I guess the question is not necessarily their outlook, but when they decide to communicate it to customers. Right, Sam?
So here's the harsh reality that nobody wants to hear. So for example, the vendors that were really explicit in stating that, by 2022, I'm going to move everybody, to the cloud. And you know how that went. For example, SAP did that. Nobody liked that. Everybody said, no, we are not ready. SAP had to back out. So basically, the vendors are never going to state that. Even the vendors that are saying that I am always going to be friendly with my customers, they know that this communication does not work in the market. So the approach that they are taking at this point of time, irrespective of whether you like it or not, okay, they are simply counting the number of customers on each of the version and what is going to be the cost for them to maintain that version. And they are deciding based on that. Under the cover, they are never going to communicate. Okay, so you are running at a risk when you are sitting on a really, really old version, you don't have any commitment from the vendor. Vendor is never going to state that. And this is especially true with companies that are carrying 200 products in their portfolio. And these companies are going to be your ECIs of the world, your Infor, your Aptean. These companies acquired a lot more products. They are carrying way too many products in their portfolio. There is no way they can afford to support all of those products. So one of these days, slowly and gradually, they are trying to move the customer. They are simply counting the number of customers they have on each of the product, and they are simply going to pull the plug. And if you are the only customer that is on that version, good luck with that.
What do you think about, from a negotiation standpoint, what's the likelihood of getting some percentage of your investment back as part of negotiating the move to the cloud? Have you been successful in doing that?
So, okay, so when you are moving to the cloud, you are expecting the percentage of the licensing fee. What are you expecting?
So I've had this perpetual on-site license forever for Oracle,
right?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Now Oracle is saying, hey, listen, I'm not gonna let you upgrade anymore on this perpetual license. You have to now move to my cloud-based license.
Yeah.
Have you been successful in negotiating a rebate or an additional discount based on the previous investment?
200%. In fact, the cloud pricing right now, the way cloud pricing is set up, to be honest, okay, it's 30% at least, 30 to 40% cheaper. You get far more features. They are trying to create the barriers so that customers move. Internally, you are not going to realize that. You are going to get far richer functionality in cloud. Every vendor is trying to do that. If you are on cloud, you get this, you don't get this. In case of on-prem, they are making your decision making difficult. They don't want you to go for on-prem. So even if you were not able to negotiate, you will get 30 to 40% cheaper price. But let's say you told them that, what, I'm super committed to cloud. I want to move with you. I was on SAP. I'm trying to move to SAP. From the vendor perspective, I don't have much of a transition. I know that you guys care for moving to the cloud, and we are going to move that. We are making this commitment. Can I get 20% additional discount? I can almost guarantee that I think they'll give it to you, because they all want you to move to the cloud.
Okay, another question in the chat. What are your thoughts about security and the cloud with ongoing cyber threats?
Okay, so that's a very interesting question. I always get that, when you look at the security in the on-prem world versus the cloud world. The only difference is, when you compare this in the real world model. So let's say if you have your money capped in your house, and you probably have $1 million in your bank account, how many resources are you going to have to protect that? Versus if you cap this money in a bank, okay, that is very well funded, maybe they are $1 trillion organization, obviously they are going to have far bigger physical security. It's just that you are sharing a tiny space in somebody else's premises. So now, which one is a better choice? If I was a smart guy, then I would probably be keeping my money in the bank, because I am not going to be as protected. You as the business are never going to have resources to be able to protect your own infrastructure. They are positioned to attract far superior talent in the market just because they are in the tech business. You are not. So security security should not be the argument for on-prem versus cloud. Cloud is always going to be secure because their reputation is at stake. For example, let's say if you go to any of the public cloud, NetSuite, Acumatica, SAP, if their cloud is going to go down, the whole world is going to know about it. Okay, a lot of really big businesses and the organizations can come down because of that. And the impact that we are going to have on the economy is going to be far worse. And then they need to fix that. So they are really watching these things. They are really paying a lot of attention to these things. So cloud is always going to be far more secure than your on-prem that you are trying to maintain in your data center. You are never going to have the resource. So security should not be the argument. Cost is a different argument. Okay, cloud may be slightly more expensive depending upon how you structure your licenses, but security should not be the argument for on-prem versus cloud.
Great answer. Great answer. You talked a lot about software architecture and integrations. How do those different integrations and architectures drive cost? Toward how does it drive software pricing?
Yeah, so one of the things that you may want to understand is whenever you are buying either ERP, P2P, CRM, doesn't matter what you are buying, you are probably going to be buying, let's say 5, 10, 15 add-ons that typically sits on that platform because they are never going to have even the companies that claim that they have last mile functionality, even they will require a lot of different add-ons. Typically, these add-ons drive the pricing for the software. Now, some really good vendors that are in the market, some companies are going to be very well funded. For example, we have companies like SourceDay, they are very well funded. So when they are going to be pricing their product, they are going to be aligning this with the system that they are integrating with. But, you have the other vendors in the market. They make it really tricky and really expensive because they don't have as large customer base. So sometimes what they are going to do is, if you have the name licensing here as part of your ERP, let's say if you are buying the WMS component may have the device pricing or the transaction pricing. Now, you might not understand what is the definition of transactions, how many transactions are you going to do in a year, and maybe you don't even know how to forecast your transactions. Today you have, let's say, 20,000 transactions. Tomorrow you might be, at 100,000 transactions. And today they have put you in a tier that price is based on 20,000. But when you are going to upgrade tomorrow, the pricing is going to be 5 times. And then you have no choice but to pay to them because, you have already installed the system. Now, I'll give you one more story here. I was working with one of the clients in the recent days, and people think that, how hard a CRM could be. CRM, argument for CRM is going to be always, Salesforce versus HubSpot or, Microsoft probably. Just choose one of them, whichever feels easy, just use them. Now, most people don't realize is the way your product is going to be designed underneath, okay? The way your parent-child relationships works inside the object, they drive the pricing, okay? So in case of HubSpot, you are going to have only one parent-child relationship. Now, when you are working with the larger organization, their hierarchy of the customers and vendors are going to be very complex. So these guys have figured this out that, okay, when you are working with the larger companies, I need to put you on a tier that you can easily start with, let's say, in $10,000 per month. And after that, once you realize that you have hit onto that limitation of the transaction, then I am going to, ask you to move to the next year, and next year is going to be 10x, which is going to be far more expensive than the other vendor who was charging you fair price to begin with. But initially the other software actually looked cheaper. So again, the hierarchy of the data objects, the way software is designed, the way it actually integrates, the way transactions flow from one system to the next, there may be a lot of different variables. And again, you need to have very deep architecture background to be able to understand these things. It's very, very, very hard for either procurement or IT person to know, because they are not going to know about every single tool out there.
So you're talking to a whole bunch of sourcing people, a whole bunch of procurement people, right? Tell us why we should not go for the cheapest deal when we're looking at software.
Because the cheapest deal is not the cheapest. And I'm going to go back to my example, okay? If you fly on the Spirit airline, is a Spirit airline always going to be the cheapest? The value, from the procurement perspective, the way I like to think of the role of the procurement, they should be worrying about the total cost, not just the transactional cost. Initially, you might get the discount, but what is the cost of the in the long term? So in case of a Spirit airline, okay, you might get the cheaper flight ticket, but are you getting the best seat? Are you getting the best experience? Are you getting the best flight? Are you getting the safest flight? Are you able to carry the number of baggages that you want to carry? If you are making a conscious choice that I'm only focused on the discount, I don't know how well that is going to go, to be honest. And by the way, in this particular case, you are not only deciding for yourself. If you are paying from your pocket, you might be okay flying on Spirit airline, but if you are going to talk to your colleague, they might not be okay with that. So again, I think you need to be looking at the overarching picture, not just at the transactional cost. In case of software, if I could have just one piece of advice for anybody in the sourcing community and the procurement community, do not worry about the discounts. discounts fire back far more than they help in case of the software. And you can take my word for it. If you look at the long-term cost when you analyze the discount, they very rarely work.
Excellent, excellent. Great answer. So, procurement folks, ready? Everybody listening? We should not go for the cheapest deal in the RFP. We need to understand the software architecture. We need to make sure we have a long-term outlook on how that software is going to be in our environment. We need to understand the integrations. What is it touching? Who is it touching? Are they okay with being touched? I don't know those things. We need to find out. And how do we find that out? We have to talk to IT. We have to be in the room where it happens. Our next chat with Sam will be in a couple of months, and we're going to be talking about how you talk to IT. And obviously Sam knows his stuff, so he's probably a good guy to have that conversation with. Sam, let's give you a few minutes to plug your podcast, some of the things you do around digital transformation and supply chain and the like. I think we've had a good conversation, but let's tell everybody a little bit about you.
Yeah, so if you guys are not familiar with WBSRocks, we publish a lot of educational content in the form of the podcast. It's really deep, it's very detailed, it's designed to educate you so that you can really be educational when you are working on these things. And we have roughly 300 episodes on the podcast right now. We do a LinkedIn Live on a weekly basis. So check us out on LinkedIn. Typically that is broadcasted on my profile. Subscribe to our YouTube channel on ElevateIQ. It's ElevatIQ. We are publishing the vendor list. I don't think anybody has this kind of information in the community. So, everybody's sort of enjoying that, the top 10 vendor list that we are publishing. So check that out. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, subscribe to the podcast. It's available on Apple, Spotify, Google, irrespective of the platform you are on. And if you like it, please leave the review. That'll mean a lot.
As we look to build out this supply chain information flow, if you guys have any topics that you want to cover, anything that you think would be valuable, feel free to reach out to Kathy. You can reach out to myself. You can reach out to Sam. We're all on LinkedIn. Even if you just want to say hi and tell us that you enjoyed it, feel free to reach out. I think Sam opened up a can of worms, and there are a lot of things that we can talk about. Negotiating software contracts, how to understand the architecture, how to get the questions to ask your IT team to get to these answers that'll allow you to make informed negotiating decisions. All of these things we're going to pick Sam's brain clean about in the next couple of months. Sam, I want to thank you very much for being a part of this. Kathy, if you have any announcements or anything else that you need to make, do you have any questions, Kathy?
No, that was great. Thank you both so much for such an informative program, and thank you for the audience for your questions. Makes a big difference in getting your questions. It makes this such an interactive program. I just want to thank you, Sam, David, for bringing this topic to our community at ISM.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Sam, for the chance to chat. I appreciate your time, and we'll see you guys in a couple of months.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
You too.